They call it the Veil, a ghost-eaten nebula where the hulks of the Fracture War went to die, a graveyard 100 light-years wide where history is left to rust in silence. The Dominion forbids passage, calls it a sacred memorial to the unification. But we wreckers know the truth. It's not a tomb they're protecting. It's a secret. My name is Kalen, and I am a ghostjacker, a memory thief. I don't salvage plate steel or fusion cores. I hunt for the faint, lingering imprints left in the neural cores of dead ships, the last synaptic firings of captains and crews baked into crystal by the violence of their end. I wipe them, scrub them clean of the screams and the terror, and sell the blank, high-grade data crystals on the black market to corporations who use them to run cargo haulers and mining bots. It's a dirty living made from dead men's thoughts, but it pays enough to keep my rig, the stray dog, from falling apart and to keep the Dominion's ever-watchful patrols off my scent. The dog isn't much. A cobbled-together scavenger vessel whose hull is a patchwork of a dozen different ships, but its sensor suite is a thing of beauty. A custom-built array that can taste the ghost of a dead ship's reactor from half a system away. I was running a deep circuit, chasing the faint signature of a Dominion battlecruiser, the Vindicator, which the record said had gone down with a full complement of next-gen logic cores. It was a risky run. The Vindicator was a hero ship, one of the final nails in the coffin of the Separatist fleets, and its resting place was deeper in the Veil than most wreckers dared to go. The nebula's ionic interference was thick out here, a constant static hiss that frayed the nerves and played tricks on the eyes, making the shipwrecks drift and turn in the periphery like slumbering beasts. My sensors painted a picture of it long before my eyes could. A jagged silhouette of torn armor and shattered weapon emplacements. A metal skeleton picked clean by the vacuum. I nudged the dog closer, my hands moving with the familiar, practiced ease of 1,000 similar approaches, the docking clamps groaning as they sought purchase on the cruiser's mangled hull. The silence was the first thing that always hit you, a profound, absolute quiet that was deeper than any sound. It was the silence of 1,000,000 voices extinguished in an instant. I sealed the umbilical, cycling the airlock with a familiar sigh of weary pneumatics, and stepped into the dead ship. The inside was a charnel house of twisted metal and frozen horrors. The ship's internal gravity had failed, and the bodies of its crew were still floating in the corridors, their faces locked in expressions of shock and agony, their Dominion uniforms flash-frozen and brittle. I moved past them without a second glance. You learn to see them not as people, but as obstacles, part of the wreckage. My goal was the bridge, the heart of the ship where the neural core would be housed in its shielded cradle. The path was treacherous, a maze of collapsed decks and sparking, dormant conduits. I cut through a sealed blast door with my plasma torch, the molten metal dripping like orange tears in the zero gravity, and pulled myself into the command center. The view from the bridge was a panorama of frozen destruction. A gaping wound in the forward viewport revealed the star-dusted tapestry of the Veil, the faint, ethereal light illuminating the floating bodies of the bridge crew, their hands still reaching for controls that had died centuries ago. And in the center of the room, nestled behind the captain's chair, was the core's housing, a sleek, black obelisk humming with a faint, residual energy. This was the prize. A core from a Vindicator-class cruiser could keep me flying for a decade. I keyed in the override sequence on my wrist-mounted comp, the access arms of the housing whining as they retracted, revealing the crystal lattice within. It was pristine, a flawless diamond of processed memory, still glowing with a soft, cyan light. But as I reached for it, my own ship's proximity alarm screamed in my ear, a frantic, insistent chirp that meant only one thing: something big was moving nearby. I froze, my hand hovering over the core, my blood turning to ice. No one was supposed to be out here. This was dead space, forgotten and forbidden. I patched into the stray dog's external cameras, my heart hammering against my ribs. The feed was grainy, distorted by the nebula's interference, but there was no mistaking the shape that was drifting out from behind a colossal piece of debris. It wasn't a Dominion patrol, and it wasn't another wrecker. It was older, its design archaic and brutal. All sharp angles and weapon ports, a predator built for a different, more savage kind of war. It bore no insignia I recognized, no registry, no running lights, just a hull the color of scorched bone. It wasn't on my long-range sensors. It wasn't broadcasting any kind of signal. And it moved with a chilling, unnatural silence. It was a ghost. A true ghost, and it was heading straight for me. Panic clawed at my throat. I aborted the core extraction, the housing arms snapping shut with a grim finality. I had to get out, run, disappear back into the nebula's haze. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A flicker of light from beneath a collapsed command console. It wasn't the steady glow of a functioning system. It was erratic, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Curiosity, the wrecker's curse, got the better of me. I pushed aside the debris, the metal groaning in protest, and found it a small, handheld device, a data slate of some kind. Its screen cracked, but still alive. It was ancient, its casing made of a burnished, unfamiliar alloy. And on its screen, a single word pulsed in crimson listener. Before I could process what it meant, the slate flared, projecting a faint, holographic star chart into the air above it. It was a map of the Veil, but it was wrong. It showed routes, safe passages, and hidden anchorages that didn't exist on any known chart. And it showed the ghost ship, not as an unknown contact, but as a designated friendly. Its course plotted to intercept not the Vindicator, but something else. Something hidden deeper within the wreckage field. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. The ghost ship wasn't hunting me. It was following this map, this ancient route. And then I saw it, a blinking icon at the heart of the chart. A destination labeled Sanctuary. The ghost ship's engines flared to life, not with the clean blue burn of a Dominion drive, but with a raw, angry orange glow that seemed to tear at the fabric of space itself. It wasn't accelerating, it was simply moving, ignoring inertia. Its destination now terrifyingly clear. It was coming for the Vindicator. It was coming for the slate. I had to make a choice. Stay and risk being caught in whatever was about to happen, or run and lose the biggest payday of my life. The choice was easy. I grabbed the slate, shoved it into my pack, and scrambled back toward the airlock, my mag boots clanging against the deck. I didn't have time to retrieve the Vindicator's core, but this slate, this map, felt infinitely more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. I threw myself back into the stray dog, sealing the inner hatch just as the docking clamps disengaged with a percussive bang. I slammed the throttle forward, the dog's engines screaming in protest as I pushed them far beyond their safety limits, banking hard into the thickest part of the nebula. My screen lit up with warnings as the ghost ship passed the Vindicator's hulk, ignoring it completely, its focus solely on me. It didn't fire weapons. It didn't hail me. It just followed, its pace matching mine effortlessly. A relentless predator that seemed to be part of the nebula itself. This wasn't a chase. It was a death march. It was faster, more agile, and its technology was unlike anything I had ever seen. I dumped my entire payload of sensor decoys, a cloud of false signals and ghost images designed to confuse even the most advanced Dominion tracker. The ship didn't even flinch. It cut through the decoys as if they weren't there, its orange engine glow a constant, terrifying star in my rear-view camera. Desperate, I rerouted all non-essential power to the engines, the lights on my console flickering, the life support systems groaning under the strain. I was flying blind, pushing my ship toward its breaking point, diving deeper into the labyrinth of twisted metal. I needed a miracle, a place to hide, something to break its line of sight. And then I remembered the slate. I pulled it from my pack, its screen still pulsing, the star chart wavering but holding steady. It showed my position, a frantic little blip trying to outrun a monster, but it also showed something else, a narrow, almost invisible corridor through a dense field of debris. A passage labeled Whisperwind. It was suicide. The passage was a needle's eye, a tight channel through the guts of a shattered capital ship, a place where one wrong move would shred my hull to confetti. But the ghost ship was closing. I had no other choice. I angled the stray dog toward the coordinates on the slate, my knuckles white on the controls. The entrance to the passage was a jagged maw of torn steel, barely wider than my ship. I cut the main thrusters, relying on my maneuvering jets to guide me through, the hull scraping against the wreckage with a sound like dying screams. For a moment, I thought I had lost it. The passage was too narrow for the larger ship to follow. But then, my ship's internal sensors went haywire. The temperature in the cockpit dropped, frost spreading across the viewport. The lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness, save for the blood-red glow of the slate's map. And a voice, ancient and filled with static, echoed not through the comms, but directly inside my head. You carry the key, child of rust. You carry the fire. The voice was a chorus of 1,000 dying whispers, the collective rage and sorrow of a forgotten army. It was the voice of the ship, and it was inside my mind. My ship began to shudder, not from the impacts of the debris, but from something resonating within its own systems. Panels sparked, conduits that had been dead for years suddenly glowing with a malevolent, crimson light. The stray dog was waking up, its patchwork systems responding to a signal I couldn't hear, a command I couldn't comprehend. The slate flared, the map dissolving into a stream of complex data, schematics for weapon systems I'd never seen, tactical protocols that made Dominion doctrine look like a child's game. And at the heart of it all was a single, terrifying piece of information: the stray dog itself. Its original designation, long buried under layers of forged registries and wiped data logs, was the Echo, a First Republic Black Ops vessel, a ship designed not for scavenging, but for insurgency. It was a ghost, a sleeper agent, and the slate I held in my hand was its ignition key. Outside, the ghost ship stopped, hovering at the entrance to the passage, its engine glow dimming. It wasn't trying to follow anymore. It was waiting. A new icon appeared on the slate's display, a broadcast signal originating from my own ship, a single, repeating burst of data sent on a frequency that had been outlawed since the signing of the Unification Treaty. It was a declaration of war, a call to arms for the dead. The message was simple: retribution is awake. And then came the response, not from the ghost ship, but from all around me, from the deepest, darkest corners of the veil. One by one, dormant systems flickered to life, the running lights of long-dead destroyers, the weapon emplacements of forgotten cruisers, the engine signatures of ships that had been silent for centuries. The veil was not a graveyard. It was a sleeping army. And Kalen, a common wrecker, had just sounded the alarm for their awakening. The voice returned, clearer now, colder, resonating from the very bones of my ship. They buried us in darkness, hoping we would be forgotten. They built their peace on our ashes and called it progress. But they forgot one thing. The cockpit filled with the holographic projections of 1,000 warships, a fleet of ghosts standing ready in the darkness. We remember. The ghost ship outside the passage didn't move, but I understood now. It wasn't a hunter. It was an escort, and my journey was just beginning. I was no longer a scavenger running from the shadows. I was the keeper of a flame I never asked for, the pilot of a ghost, and the unwilling herald of a war that had never truly ended. The Dominion had built its serene, orderly universe on a foundation of lies and buried history, and I had just dug up their deepest, most violent secret. They would come for me now, not with patrols, but with fleets. With everything they had, to silence the echo I had just unleashed. The stray dog, my ship, my prison, my weapon, drifted out of the passage and into the open, its ancient systems humming with a newfound and terrible purpose, taking its place at the head of a phantom fleet. The slate in my hand felt impossibly heavy, a weight of history and blood that was now mine to carry. The choice had been made for me the moment I picked it up. My old life was gone, vaporized in the orange glow of a forgotten war. All that was left was the path ahead, a path lit by the fires of retribution and paved with the wreckage of a peace that was never real to begin with. The weight in my gut wasn't fear anymore. It was the cold, heavy certainty of a man who has just realized he is no longer just a man, but a trigger. The silence that followed was heavier than any I had ever known in the Veil, a stillness charged with the potential energy of 1,000 sleeping leviathans. My cockpit, once a familiar sanctuary of solitude, now felt like the eye of a storm, a fragile bubble of sanity surrounded by an ocean of ghosts. The star chart on the slate had vanished, replaced by a cascading waterfall of tactical data, fleet dispositions, and readiness reports from ships whose names were nothing but grim footnotes in the Dominion's sanitized history books. The Ironclad, the Defiance, the Revenant, they were all reporting in, their phantom systems online, their long dormant weapon cores spinning up with a low, collective hum that I felt in my teeth. We are the Legion. The voice in my head clarified, the chorus of whispers coalescing into a single, focused thought that was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. The last synaptic fire of every soul who refused to kneel. When our bodies were broken, our minds were burned into the neural cores of our ships. We are not machines. Kalen, we are the memory of defiance made manifest. I wanted to scream, to rip the slate from the console and hurl it into the void, but my hands were frozen, locked to the controls, as if the ship itself had grown tendrils to hold me in place. "I'm a wrecker," I whispered, the words sounding pathetic and small in the sudden vastness of my reality. "I strip hulks for parts. I'm not one of you." "You are now," the Legion replied, its tone devoid of sympathy. The listener slate has synchronized your living neural patterns with our collective consciousness. You are the bridge, the conduit through which our will can be focused. You are the hand that will once again hold the sword. My ship, the Echo, began to move, detaching itself from the wreckage field and taking up a position at the head of the newly formed armada. The other ships followed, falling into a loose, predatory formation around me, their movements unnervingly fluid, like a shoal of sharks sensing blood in the water. They were a fleet of phantoms, their hulls scarred and pitted from ancient battles, some still bearing the gaping wounds that had sent them to this graveyard. Yet they moved with a singular, terrifying purpose. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "I'm not a commander. I don't know the first thing about fighting a war. You will learn, or you will die. The choice is the same." The star chart reappeared on the slate, the blinking icon labeled Sanctuary, glowing with an insistent pulse. The Dominion built their empire over our bones, but some roots run too deep to be torn out. Sanctuary is a relic of the First Republic, a hidden fortress built inside a rogue planetoid, shielded from all modern sensor technology. It holds the means to sustain us, to rearm us, to remind us of what we are fighting for. We must reach it before the Dominion can quarantine the Veil. The logic was cold and inescapable. We were a massive energy signature in a sector that was supposed to be dead. It was only a matter of time before a Dominion patrol came to investigate. We were exposed, vulnerable, a ghost army caught in the dawn's light. I felt a surge of bitter resentment. My simple, solitary life had been hijacked by a cause I didn't believe in, by dead soldiers who demanded a blood price from a future that had forgotten them. But as I looked out at the fleet arrayed before me, at the silent, patient resolve of those resurrected warships, I saw not just weapons, but tombs. Each ship was a memorial to a crew that had chosen annihilation over surrender. And in that moment, the wrecker in me, the part that had always felt a grudging respect for the dead I profited from, gave way to something else, something colder and harder. "Fine," I breathed, the word a plume of vapor in the frigid cockpit. "Give me the coordinates. I'll take you to your damn sanctuary." The command must come from you," the Legion insisted. "We are a weapon, and you are our wielder. Focus your intent. Speak the order." It was a test. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine myself as something other than Kalen, the scavenger. I tried to feel the cold fury that had sustained these ghosts for centuries. I pictured the Dominion, with its sterile peace and its polished, smiling officials who spoke of unity while standing on a mountain of skulls. A spark of anger, my own anger at a system that had left me scavenging on the fringes, ignited in my chest. "All ships," I said, my voice echoing with a strange, newfound authority through the ship's internal comms, an audio signal that felt redundant next to the telepathic link. "Set a course for the coordinates marked Sanctuary, maximum silent running. We leave now." The response was instantaneous. 1,000 engine signatures flared in silent unison. the orange glow of their archaic drives painting the surrounding debris in hellish light. The fleet began to move, a river of dark metal flowing through the star-dusted channels of the veil. We were less than an hour out when it happened. A flicker on the edge of my sensor screen, a telltale ripple of distorted space-time that signaled a warp drive disengaging. One ship, small, probably a long-range scout. Its transponder code identified it as the Vigil, a Dominion pacifier-class vessel. It was sleek, modern, a silver needle against the black velvet of space. It was everything we were not. It hailed us, the standard, automated Dominion greeting echoing incongruously in the sudden tension of my cockpit. Unidentified fleet, this is the Dominion scout vessel Vigil. You're in restricted space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions immediately. Failure to comply will be met with force. I froze. My throat went dry. This was it. The first test. They cannot be allowed to send a warning. The Legion's voice cut through my paralysis, cold and absolute. The wolf must not be allowed to alert the pack. Erase them. Erase them, I stammered. It's a scout ship, maybe 5. 10 people on board. They wear the emblem of our jailers. They are the inheritors of the lie. There is no innocence in the Dominion. The Vigil hailed us again, its tone sharper now, less a greeting and more a demand. This is your final warning. Identify yourselves now. On my screen, I could see its weapon ports opening, the faint blue glow of its plasma cannons charging. It was outmatched 1,000 to 1, but it didn't know it yet. It saw a collection of ancient, derelict ships, not a resurrected battle fleet. It was brave, and it was foolish, and it was about to die. Do it, I whispered, not to the Legion, but to myself, sealing my fate with 2 quiet words. Take them down. The attack was a thing of brutal, silent beauty. There was no grand charge, no volley of energy beams. Instead, a dozen ships, wraith-like destroyers and frigates, simply detached from the main fleet and vanished into the shadows of the nearby wreckage. The Vigil's commander must have been confused, watching the targets on his screen disappear. He probably thought their systems were failing, a common affliction in the Veil. He would have had no way of knowing that the ships were using the debris as cover, their archaic drives giving off a thermal signature so low it was indistinguishable from the background radiation of the nebula. They emerged on all sides of the scout ship at once, a coordinated strike from ghosts. Their weapons were not the elegant, precise energy lances of the Dominion. They fired physical projectiles, massive slugs of depleted uranium that struck the Vigil's shields like colossal hammers. The impacts not absorbed but brutally transferred, shaking the ship to its core. The scout's shields flared, buckled, and collapsed in under a second. Then the plasma cannons opened up, not in focused beams, but in great, searing clouds of incandescent gas that enveloped the Vigil, cooking its hull, melting its sensors, and boiling its crew alive. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. One moment, the Vigil was a proud symbol of Dominion authority. The next, it was a drifting, silent piece of slag, its internal compartments venting atmosphere and bodies into the void. No distress call was sent. No warning was issued. It was simply erased. I watched it all, my stomach churning, a cold sweat beating on my forehead. This wasn't the clean, impersonal destruction you saw in Dominion war vids. This was murder, swift and savage, This was the reality of the war I had just joined, the first of many. The Legion stated, its voice a chilling premonition. They will know we are here now, not by a message, but by the silence where the vigil used to be. They will come in force. We must not linger. I swallowed hard, forcing down the bile in my throat. The wrecker in me was screaming, horrified by the waste, by the destruction of a perfectly good ship whose parts could have been salvaged. But the commander, the new, unwilling part of me, understood the cold, hard necessity of it. We were at war, and there was no room for sentiment. Continue to sanctuary, I ordered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Push the engines. Get us out of here. As the fleet accelerated, I took one last look at the dying ember of the vigil. We were leaving a message after all. A single, brutal statement carved into the heart of the Dominion's most sacred graveyard. We had defiled their memorial, woken their ghosts, and spilled the first blood of a new war. I had crossed a line from which there was no return. I was no longer Kalen the Wrecker, the man who lived in the quiet spaces between the living and the dead. I now belonged to the dead, and our work had only just begun. The weight of the 1,000 warships at my back felt heavier than ever, a burden and a weapon in equal measure. And as we plunged deeper into the darkness of the veil, heading for a sanctuary that promised both salvation and a deeper damnation, I finally understood the Legion's cold purpose. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about erasure. They intended to wipe the Dominion from the stars, to tear down their serene empire and salt the earth of its foundations, and they had chosen me to light the first fire. The thought should have terrified me, but as the ghost of the vigil faded behind us, I felt a strange, chilling sense of peace. The universe was no longer a place of quiet rust and forgotten memories. It was a hunting ground, and we were the predators. Our journey to Sanctuary was a tense, silent passage through the deepest, most treacherous sectors of the Veil. We moved like a phantom tide, a fleet of ghosts navigating a dead sea. Our only guide, the crimson map on the listener slate. The Legion was a constant presence in my mind, a low thrum of 1,000 focused consciousnesses, feeding me tactical data, sensor readings, and fragments of their own, long dead memories. I saw through their eyes, felt the phantom recoil of their cannons, and tasted the coppery tang of their final, defiant breaths. It was an unnerving intimacy, a violation of the soul that left me feeling hollowed out and raw, as if my own identity was slowly being eroded and replaced by the collective will of the dead. I learned their language, the unspoken cant of veterans who had fought a war so brutal it had been scrubbed from the history books. A flicker of a drive signature was a whisper, a potential ambush, a shadow play, and the Dominion was always, simply, the lie. They taught me tactics born from desperation and fury, strategies that relied on misdirection, psychological warfare, and a willingness to sacrifice ships and souls for a strategic advantage. It was a cold, brutal calculus that left no room for the kind of heroism the Dominion preached in its academies. This was war as a disease, a creeping, infectious rot designed to break an empire not with a single, decisive blow, but by corroding its foundations from within. Sanctuary was not what I had expected. The slate's coordinates led us to a seemingly unremarkable rogue planetoid, a barren, nice pockmarked sphere of ice and rock drifting aimlessly in the interstellar dark. There were no visible structures, No energy signatures, no sign of any kind of habitation. But as the echo approached, the Legion instructed me to broadcast a specific, low-frequency signal, a sequence of resonating pulses that was more music than data. In response, a vast section of the planetoid's surface seemed to shimmer, the illusion of solid rock dissolving to reveal a colossal, hexagonal aperture, the entrance to a cavernous docking bay large enough to swallow our entire fleet. The interior was a breathtaking sight, a testament to the forgotten power of the First Republic. This was no mere outpost. It was a self-sustaining city-state, a subterranean fortress carved from the heart of the planetoid. A captured singularity at its core provided near-limitless power, feeding vast hydroponic farms, automated manufactories, and cavernous hangars filled with rows of dormant, unmanned drones. The air was clean and cool, recycled by ancient, silent machinery, and the walls were lined with data conduits that glowed with a soft, golden light. It was a ghost city, a perfectly preserved relic waiting for its inhabitants to return. As our ships docked, their systems connecting to Sanctuary's power grid, I felt the Legion's collective consciousness sigh in relief. Home. The thought echoed in my mind, tinged with a sorrow so profound it was almost a physical blow. The last bastion of the truth. Here, in the heart of this hidden fortress, the full scope of the Legion's plan was revealed to me. The data vaults of Sanctuary held not just military schematics and tactical archives, but the complete, unredacted history of the Fracture War. I saw the Dominion's rise not as a noble unification, but as a systematic campaign of cultural and intellectual genocide. I learned of the Concordance, the treaty that had outlawed not just technologies, but ideas, philosophies, art forms, and scientific theories that challenged the Dominion's rigid, hierarchical worldview. The separatists, the so-called traitors, and anarchists of the official histories were revealed to be free thinkers, scientists, artists, and rebels who had fought to preserve the chaotic, vibrant diversity of the First Republic. The Legion was their final, desperate act of defiance, an army of memories created to ensure that the truth would not die with them. Sanctuary was also a factory, a place where our phantom fleet could be made whole again. Automated repair drones, guided by the Legion's consciousness, swarmed over our battered ships, patching hull breaches, replacing burnt-out conduits, and rearming weapon systems with munitions that had been stockpiled for centuries. But the most vital resource Sanctuary held was something far more precious than steel or plasma, a genetic archive, a repository containing the complete DNA sequences of every soul who had died fighting for the separatist cause. The Legion's ultimate goal was not just to win a war, but to resurrect a civilization. They had the minds, preserved in the neural cores of their ships. Here, in the biovats of Sanctuary's cloning labs, they had the means to give those minds new bodies. It was a terrifying, audacious plan, a promise of rebirth that blurred the line between liberation and abomination. My role in this grand, terrifying scheme was becoming clearer. The Legion could command the machines of Sanctuary, but they could not interface with the biovats. The process of decanting a clone, of imprinting a preserved consciousness onto a newly grown body, required a living, biological touchstone, a psychic anchor to bridge the gap between the digital and the organic. It required me. "You want me to play God," I said, my voice barely a whisper as I stood before a vast, cylindrical chamber filled with thousands of floating embryonic figures, their pale forms bathed in the soft, amniotic glow of the nutrient fluid. We do not ask you to play God. The Legion corrected, its voice resonating from the chamber's control panel. We ask you to be a midwife, to help us be born again. We are not gods. We are just men and women who refuse to remain ghosts. The first one they chose was a woman named Alara, the former captain of the Defiance. I watched as a single, fully formed body was guided by mechanical arms into a smaller, isolated chamber. I placed my hand on the cool, crystalline surface of the imprinting console, the listener's slate docked and glowing beside it. The Legion guided me through the process, a complex mental dance of focusing my will, channeling Alara's consciousness from the ship's core, through the slate, through me, and into the waiting vessel. I felt her life, her memories, her rage, and her hope wash through me like a tidal wave. I felt the shock of the plasma blast that had killed her, the fierce, defiant love she had for her crew, and the unyielding certainty of her cause. For a moment, we were one, our minds intertwined. Then, the connection broke, and the woman in the chamber opened her eyes. They were the eyes of a soldier who had been dead for 200 years, and they burned with a cold, clear fire. She looked at her new hands, then at me, and a slow, grim smile touched her lips. "It's good to be back, listener," she said, her voice raspy from disuse but strong. "Now, let's wake the others. We have a war to win." Over the next few days, I became the nexus of a resurrection. One by one, the heroes of the separatist cause were reborn, their minds decanted into new bodies. Jax, the hulking, cybernetically enhanced breacher from the Ironclad. Anya, the cool, calculating intelligence officer of the Revenant. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They were a walk-in army of the dead, their faces young, but their eyes ancient. Each one a living testament to the Dominion's crimes. They were organized, disciplined, and utterly ruthless, their every action guided by the singular purpose that had sustained them through centuries of silent waiting. I was their messiah and their prisoner, a necessary tool for their rebirth, but also an outsider, a child of rust who had grown up in the shadow of the lie they sought to destroy. They treated me with a strange mixture of reverence and suspicion, their conversations often stopping when I entered a room, their gazes lingering on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Alara became their de facto leader, her strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve quickly reestablishing the command structure that had existed before their deaths. She and I formed a tense, uneasy alliance. She needed me to complete the resurrection of her army, and I needed her to navigate the treacherous political currents of this city of ghosts. Our first target was a place called Xylos, a remote Dominion re-education colony in a neighboring sector. According to Anya's intelligence, Xylos was more than just a prison. It was a laboratory where the Dominion was experimenting with a new form of neural dampening, a technology designed to pacify entire populations by erasing memories of dissent and rebellion. It was a weapon aimed at the very heart of what the Legion represented, a tool to create a perfect, placid empire where even the thought of defiance was impossible. The plan Alara devised was audacious and brutal. We would not engage the Dominion fleet directly. Instead, we would use a small ICO cloaked insertion team, led by Jax, to infiltrate the colony and capture the lead scientist, a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. Anya's analysis suggested Thorn was the linchpin of the entire project. A brilliant but morally compromised scientist who could be persuaded to cooperate. The rest of the fleet would create a diversion, a series of coordinated ghost raids on Dominion shipping lanes on the far side of the sector, drawing their patrols away from Xylos. It was a classic shadow play, a strategy of misdirection and precise, targeted violence. I was to remain in Sanctuary, my role as the listener deemed too vital to risk in the field. But as the insertion team prepared to depart, Alara approached me. "They will be linked to you," she explained, her gaze unwavering. "Jax and his team, their neural implants are keyed to the listener slate. You will see what they see, feel what they feel. You will be their anchor in the storm." I understood the unspoken part of her message. I would not just be an observer. If one of them died, I would feel their death as if it were my own. It was a leash, a way to bind me ever closer to their cause, to ensure that their war became my war, their blood my blood. As Jax's stealth ship, the Silent Blade, detached from Sanctuary and vanished into the void, I felt the first, faint tendrils of the neural link connect with my mind. It was a cold, metallic feeling, the sense of other minds brushing against my own. The invasion of Xylos had begun, and whether I wanted it to be or not, I was on the front line. The link to Jax's team was a disorienting, invasive stream of sensory data. I experienced the mission in jarring, fragmented bursts, the bone-deep cold of the Silent Blade's hull as it ran without internal heating to minimize its thermal signature, the stomach-lurching disorientation of its cloaking field, engaging, bending light and space around the ship, the low, guttural hum of Jax's cybernetic enhancements as he performed his final weapons checks. His thoughts were a low, controlled burn of professional focus, a stark contrast to the needle-sharp anxiety of the younger members of his team. I felt their collective adrenaline spike as the ship slipped past Xylos' orbital sensor grid, a phantom moving through a web of invisible light. They landed in the planet's desolate polar region, a landscape of jagged, ice-sheathed mountains under a sky choked with frozen methane clouds. The colony was 1,000 kilometers to the south, a sprawling complex built into the floor of a vast, arid canyon. Jax's team would have to cross the frozen wastes on foot to avoid the colony's seismic and atmospheric sensors. I felt the biting wind on my own skin, saw the way the ice crystals swirled in the beams of their headlamps. Through Jax's enhanced optical feed, I saw the colony's heat signature, a faint, pulsing bloom of warmth in the otherwise frigid landscape. The journey was a grueling, 10-hour trek through a landscape designed to kill. I felt the ache in their muscles, the gnawing hunger, the constant, low-grade fear that was a soldier's constant companion. One of the younger soldiers, a kid named Rorik, who had been a starfighter pilot before his death, stumbled, his leg plunging through a thin crust of snow into a hidden crevasse. I felt the searing pain as his leg twisted, heard his muffled cry of agony. Through the link, I felt Jax's immediate, cold assessment of the injury, a severe sprain, maybe a fracture. He knelt beside the boy, and I felt the cold, pragmatic thought form in his mind. He will slow us down. He is a liability. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to execute him, a mercy killing to preserve the mission. Instead, I felt Jax's immense strength as he hauled the boy to his feet, slung his arm over his own massive shoulders, and growled a single, gruff order that I felt more than heard. Move. They reached the outskirts of the colony, just as its twin suns were beginning to rise, casting long, distorted shadows across the canyon floor. The facility was a sterile, utilitarian structure of gray ferrocrete and armored glass, surrounded by a high-energy fence that hummed with lethal power. Anya's intel had provided them with a weak point, a sewage outflow conduit that ran from the lowest levels of the facility out into the desert. It was a filthy, ignominious point of entry, but it was their only one. I felt the claustrophobia as they squeezed into the narrow, slime-coated pipe, the stench of chemical waste and human filth filling my own senses. They moved in silence for what felt like an eternity, their progress slow and torturous. Finally, they reached an internal grate. Jax cut through it with a low-energy plasma torch, the hissing of the metal barely audible over the gurgle of the waste. They emerged into the dark, humid maintenance tunnels beneath the colony, the air thick with the smell of ozone and recycled air. The infiltration was a masterclass in stealth and brutal efficiency. They moved through the lower levels like ghosts, disabling security cameras and neutralizing the few automated patrol drones they encountered with precise, silent shots from their silenced railguns. I felt Jax's mind mapping the facility, his tactical awareness a living, breathing thing. He was a predator in his natural habitat, a creature of shadows and violence. Their target, Dr. Thorne's laboratory, was in the central spire of the complex, a high-security zone protected by biometric scanners and elite Dominion guards. Getting there would be the hardest part. As they ascended, the sterile, empty maintenance tunnels gave way to the inhabited sections of the colony. I saw it through their eyes, the stark white corridors, the subdued lighting, the unsettling quiet. There were people here, residents, but they moved with a strange, placid slowness, their faces blank and expressionless, their eyes vacant. They were the products of Thorne's work, their minds scrubbed clean of passion and dissent. It was a vision of the Dominion's perfect future, a society of peaceful, productive, and soulless automata. The sight filled me with a revulsion so profound it felt like a physical illness, a feeling that was mirrored and amplified by the cold fury radiating from Jax and his team. They reached the lab's security checkpoint, a sealed blast door flanked by two guards in gleaming white carapaced armor. There was no way to bypass them silently. I felt Jax's decision before he made it, the cold click of a tactical choice falling into place. He gave a silent hand signal, and the team moved. The attack was over in a heartbeat. Jax burst from the shadows, his cybernetic arm a blur of motion as he slammed one guard's helmeted head into the wall with enough force to shatter both. The other guard raised his pulse rifle, but one of Jax's soldiers was already there, a combat knife plunging into the soft tissue at the base of his neck. There was no sound, just the wet thud of bodies hitting the floor. Jax swiped a keycard from one of the dead guards, and the blast door hissed open. Dr. Eris Thorne's laboratory was a sterile, circular room filled with holographic displays and humming diagnostic equipment. In the center of the room, a man was strapped to a chair, a complex, crystalline helmet covering his head, his body convulsing as streams of data flowed into his mind. And standing before him, observing the process with a look of detached, academic curiosity, was Thorne. He was a small, unassuming man with thinning gray hair and a nervous, bird-like demeanor. He didn't even notice them until Jax's hand clamped down on his shoulder. Thorne yelped, spinning around, his eyes wide with terror. Who are you? How did you get in here?" Jax didn't answer. He simply gestured with his head toward the man in the chair. "What are you doing to him?" He rumbled, his voice a low growl. Thorn swallowed, his gaze darting nervously around the room. "It's a new protocol. Memory realignment. We are helping him find peace, purging the discordant memories that cause him distress." He was a poet. A voice whispered in my mind, cold and sharp. It was Anya, back in Sanctuary, accessing the colony's records through a back door her team had planted. He was arrested for writing seditious material. They are erasing his soul. The fury that surged through the neural link was a physical force, a wave of pure, unadulterated hatred that made me gasp. I felt Jax's hand tighten on Thorn's shoulder, his cybernetic fingers digging into the scientist's flesh. Then all hell broke loose. An alarm blared, a jarring and high-pitched klaxon that echoed through the facility. A calm, female voice announced, "Security breach in Sector Gamma. All units respond." They had been discovered. Jax shoved Thorn toward his team. "Get him to the extraction point. I'll buy you some time." Before anyone could argue, he turned and charged out of the lab, his railgun already spitting a stream of hypervelocity projectiles down the corridor at a squad of approaching Dominion guards. I was torn. My consciousness split between the two groups. I felt the desperate, frantic retreat of the team dragging the terrified scientist with them, and the cold, focused fury of Jax as he single-handedly held off a growing wave of Dominion forces. He was a whirlwind of destruction, a one-man army of reinforced bone and cybernetic rage. He used the corridor as a choke point, his massive frame providing a near-impenetrable wall of cover. But there were too many of them. I felt the searing heat as a plasma bolt struck his shoulder, melting armor and flesh. He grunted in pain but didn't slow down. Another shot hit his leg, and he stumbled. But he caught himself, roaring in defiance. He was a cornered bear, magnificent and terrible in his final, bloody stand. And then I felt it, a sharp, piercing cold in my own chest. A sudden nose-crushing pressure. Jax had been hit in the torso. A clean shot from a high-powered sniper rifle that had punched straight through his armor. Through his eyes, I saw the world tilt, the colors fading to gray. His last thought was not of fear or regret, but of a simple, clear image, the face of his captain, Alara, smiling. Then, silence. The link shattered. The sudden absence, a psychic wound that left me reeling, gasping for air in the quiet command center of Sanctuary. A part of me had just been extinguished. The cold, sterile reality of death, of their death, was no longer an abstract concept. It was a raw, gaping hole in my own mind. I stared at the main tactical display, my hands shaking uncontrollably, as the icon representing Jax blinked once, then vanished from the map. The mission was a success. The rest of the team had made it to the extraction point with Thorn, but the cost felt immeasurable. Back in the cockpit of the Echo, Alara stood motionless, her face a mask of stone. She had felt it too. She had lost a part of her soul for the second time. She turned to me, her ancient eyes filled with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the room. "Now you know, listener," she said, her voice a low, broken whisper. "Now you understand the price. There is no victory without sacrifice. Welcome to the Legion." The return of the extraction team cast a pall over Sanctuary. The capture of Dr. Thorn was a significant strategic victory, but the loss of Jax, a legendary figure from the First War, was a devastating blow to the morale of the newly resurrected Legion. His empty chair in the command center was a stark, silent monument to the reality of their renewed struggle. I felt his absence like a phantom limb, a constant, dull ache in my consciousness where his cold, steady presence used to be. The link to his death had changed me. The war was no longer a grand, abstract cause I was reluctantly part of. It was a visceral, personal conflict, and I had felt its price firsthand. The others looked at me differently now, with a kind of grim acceptance. I had bled with them, in a way. I was no longer just the listener, the strange, living key to their rebirth. I was a comrade. Doctor, Thorn was a broken man, stripped of the sterile authority of his lab, and confronted with the resurrected ghosts of the history his masters had tried to erase. His nervous arrogance crumbled into terrified compliance. Anya's interrogation was not a brutal affair of physical torture, but a precise, surgical deconstruction of his psyche. She used the data from the listener slate, the unfiltered truth of the Dominion's atrocities, to shatter the carefully constructed lies he had lived by. He wept as he watched recordings of the pacification of entire worlds, the burning of libraries, the execution of artists and philosophers. He saw the end result of his peaceful science, and it broke him. He gave them everything, the complete schematics of the neural dampening technology, the locations of every research facility, the access codes to the Dominion's Central Intelligence Network, and, most importantly, a single, devastating piece of information. The project on Xylos was merely a prototype. The final version, a planet-sized broadcast array codenamed Project Silence, was nearing completion, hidden in the core of the Dominion's capital world, Meridian. Once activated, it would broadcast a neural dampening field across the entire galaxy, permanently erasing the capacity for violent dissent, creative thought, and rebellion from the human mind. It would be the final victory of the lie, a silent, eternal peace, bought at the cost of the human soul. The revelation galvanized the Legion. Their grief for Jax was channeled into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They would not allow the Dominion to castrate the human spirit. They would strike at the heart of the serpent, at Meridian itself. And they would burn Project Silence from the stars, even if it meant their own final and true annihilation. Alara's plan was suicidally audacious. The main fleet, the full resurrected might of the Separatist Armada, would launch a direct, head-on assault on Meridian's orbital defenses. It would be a feint, a massive, bloody sacrifice designed to draw the entirety of the Dominion home fleet into a single, massive engagement. While the battle raged in orbit, a single small ship, the Echo, my ship, would use a set of obsolete, pre-Dominion hyperspace coordinates provided by Thorn to bypass the main defenses and insert a small strike team directly into Meridian's atmosphere. Our target was the broadcast array's primary power conduit, a massive plasma relay station located in the planet's frozen, uninhabited polar region. If we could overload the conduit, it would trigger a cascade failure that would destroy the entire array. "Why me?" I asked Alara as we stood before the tactical display, the holographic representation of Meridian, a glittering jewel surrounded by a swarm of hostile red icons. "Why the Echo send the Silent Blade? Send a warship." "Because the Echo is a ghost," she replied, her eyes fixed on the display. "It's a First Republic ship. Its drive signature is so archaic, so alien to modern Dominion sensors that it might just be dismissed as a glitch, a phantom reading. And because you are the listener, the array is not just a machine. Kalen, it's a psychic weapon. It will try to break you, to fill your mind with peace, with apathy, with the desire to simply lay down your arms and accept the quiet. Your connection to us, to the rage of the Legion, is the only thing that can shield the strike team's minds from its influence. You are our anchor and our sword. I was to lead the strike team myself, a small elite group of 4, including Anya and Rorich, the young pilot whose leg Jax had saved. We were to be the scalpel, while the rest of the Legion was the hammer. The night before the assault, the atmosphere in Sanctuary was thick with a strange, solemn energy. It was not the boisterous camaraderie of soldiers before a battle, but the quiet, introspective calm of people who had already died once and were now preparing to do it again, this time on their own terms. They weren't fighting for their own survival, but for the future's right to choose its own destiny, to feel its own passions, to make its own mistakes. I walked through the hangars, watching them make their final preparations, their young faces etched with ancient resolve. They were ghosts in borrowed bodies, but in that moment, they were more alive than anyone I had ever known. The battle for Meridian was a firestorm. We watched it begin from the bridge of the Echo, a safe distance away in the void, waiting for our window. The Legion fleet emerged from hyperspace in a single, brilliant flash, a resurrected army of myth and legend appearing on the doorstep of their hated enemy. The Dominion home fleet, caught completely by surprise, scrambled to respond. The void erupted in a silent, terrible ballet of light and destruction. Energy lances, brighter than suns, tore through the hulls of ancient dreadnoughts. Swarms of physical projectiles, fired from cannons that had been cold for centuries, hammered against the shimmering shields of Dominion battlecruisers. It was a clash of philosophies, of eras, of ideals, fought with fire and steel in the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space. Alara was a master conductor of this symphony of destruction. Her fleet, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a savage, coordinated fury that baffled the more rigid, doctrine-bound Dominion commanders. They used the wreckage of their own dying ships as cover, executed impossible maneuvers, and fought with the desperation of souls who had nothing left to lose. Amidst the chaos, our moment came. Now, listener. Alara's voice echoed in my mind, calm and clear despite the maelstrom raging around her flagship. For the truth. I pushed the throttle forward, and the Echo plunged into the swirling chaos of Meridian's upper atmosphere. The ship shuddered as we hit the air, the hull groaning under the strain. Below us, the planet was a pristine, ordered world of gleaming spires and perfectly manicured landscapes, a beautiful, serene facade for the spiritual rot at its core. As we descended, I felt it the subtle, insidious touch of Project Silence. It was a gentle, soothing pressure in my mind, a soft, persuasive whisper that promised an end to fear, to anger, to pain. It promised peace. I felt my own rage, the anger that had been simmering in me since the veil, begin to cool, to be replaced by a weary desire to simply stop, to rest, resist. The Legion's collective voice roared in my head, a counterwave of pure, focused fury that shattered the illusion of peace. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the image of Jax's dying face, on the empty eyes of the residents of Xylos, on the memory of Alara's profound grief. I let the hatred burn, using it as a shield. We landed hard near the coordinates Thorn had provided, a vast, wind-swept plateau of ice and snow. The plasma relay station was a colossal, crystalline structure that jutted from the ice like a shard of frozen lightning, its peak lost in the swirling, frozen clouds. As we stepped out of the ship, the psychic pressure intensified. I saw Rorik stumble, his face slack, a beatific smile on his lips. Anya grabbed him, her own face pale with strain. "Stay with me, soldier," she hissed, her voice a lifeline in the sea of false tranquility. I was the anchor. I reached out with my mind, pushing the Legion's collective memory of pain and defiance into them. A brutal, violent act of psychic CPR. The blankness in Rorik's eyes cleared, replaced by a flicker of his old fire. We had to move fast. The station was defended, not by soldiers, but by automated turrets and drones. Their cold, machine logic immune to the array's psychic influence. We fought our way to the base of the structure, a desperate, running battle across the ice. Inside, the station was a cathedral of light and energy, a vast, hollow chamber with the primary power conduit, a river of pure, incandescent plasma flowing up through its center. Our mission was Simple Plant, a series of high-yield explosive charges on the conduit's magnetic containment rings, and get out. But as we reached the central platform, a figure emerged from the blinding light of the conduit. It was not a soldier, but a man in the simple gray robes of a Dominion arbiter, his face serene, his eyes radiating an aura of profound peace. "You are children, lashing out in the dark," he said, his voice not a sound, but a thought projected directly into our minds, a voice far more powerful and insidious than the array's gentle background hum. "You cling to your pain, your rage, because you're afraid of the quiet. Lay down your weapons. Accept the peace that you're offered. The war is over." I felt my resolve waver. His words were a balm, a promise of an end to the struggle, to the killing, to the grief. For a fleeting moment, I wanted nothing more than to believe him. But then, I felt the Legion. I felt the memory of 1,000 burning worlds, of 1,000,000,000 silent voices. And I felt Alara, somewhere in the fiery chaos of orbit, fighting and dying for the right to scream. The Arbiter was the heart of the lie, the ultimate expression of the Dominion's sterile, passionless peace, and he had to be silenced. "There is no peace without freedom," I thought back at him, pushing all of my own pain, my own anger, my own grief into the thought. "And there is no freedom without rage." I raised my rifle and fired. The shot passed through him as if he were a hologram, but the act of defiance shattered his psychic hold. Anya and Rorik snapped out of their trance and began planting the charges. The Arbiter smiled, a look of pity on his face. So be it. The conduit began to pulse, the river of plasma flaring with impossible brightness. The array was beginning to activate. We had seconds. We finished planting the last charge and sprinted for the exit. A wave of pure, white psychic energy washing over us, threatening to drown us in its serene, empty peace. We threw ourselves into the echo as the countdown timer on the detonator hit 0. The explosion was not a sound, but a silent, blossoming flower of pure, white light that consumed the entire station. A psychic shockwave, The death scream of the array slammed into our ship and into my mind. I screamed, clutching my head as the raw, unfiltered agony of a billion souls, their pain no longer suppressed, flooded the neural link. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. In its place, there was a great and terrible silence, not the false peace of the Dominion, but a true silence, an emptiness, a clean slate. We limped back into orbit, the Echo battered and barely functioning. The battle was over. The Dominion fleet, their command and control shattered by the psychic backlash from the destroyed array, was in full retreat. The surviving ships of the Legion, scarred and bleeding but victorious, were holding their position around the wounded planet. On the bridge of her flagship, Alara stood watching us approach on the main screen. Her ship was a wreck, its port side a gaping wound of molten metal. But she was alive. I opened a channel. "It's done," I said, my voice hoarse. "Project Silence is gone." Alara nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "You did it, listener," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of grief and fierce, terrible pride. "You gave them back their fire." I looked down at Meridian, at the world we had just broken and saved. The war wasn't over. The Dominion was shattered, but not destroyed, and the galaxy, now free from its psychic chains, would awaken into a new era of chaos and conflict, of passion and pain. We had not brought peace. We had brought freedom in all its terrible, beautiful, and bloody glory. I was no longer Kellen the Wrecker. I was the listener, the midwife of a resurrection, the herald of a new age. And as the Echo took its place among the scarred and victorious ships of the Legion, I knew, with a cold and heavy certainty, that my work was just beginning. The ghosts were awake, and they would not rest until the last vestiges of the lie had been burned from the stars.